started, I'll give you a little summary. But I also really want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions from you, because the legislative session, we cover a huge range of topics. And so I'm going to try to hit on a few of them now, but I really want to make sure that you all get a chance to ask me about the things that you're most interested in, and get feedback from you on legislation, on communication, and all manner of things. So thank you for coming here on a Saturday morning. I know you have lots of other things to do, although there is a beautiful farmer's market right across the street and some good places to get coffee. So those of you who are coming from someplace other than Salisbury, I'm glad to have you here. So I thought I'd highlight, just in a few categories, some of the things that I was most closely involved with in passing this term. Some of the things that were particular areas of compromise that I thought were important, and then some of the things that didn't make it through this year that are important, I think, to us and to the region, that I'm looking forward to giving more effort to as we move forward. So in terms of things that passed this year, one of the things that I sit on 3 committees. I'm on the Judiciary Committee, the Appropriations Committee, and the Environment Committee. And environment, obviously covers environmental matters, so that can be a wide range of things. I think I talk frequently about the environment to this area as being not just a trust, but an economic asset. It is something that drives people to come to our area. It is something that underpins many businesses in the area, and so it's important to us for a whole variety of reasons. That subject matter is really important. The other 2 committees, Judiciary, obviously I have a background as a lawyer and a prosecutor, so I come to that with a pretty wide range of experience. I have a little bit of a head start on some of those issues and some additional credibility to work on some of the issues that come before Judiciary. But they cover a wide range of subject matter too, because in Judiciary we hear anything that has a penalty, either a civil or criminal penalty associated with it. So if there's a fine or a penal implication here in Judiciary. And then of course in appropriations, we hear everything that has a price tag. So that is the widest subject matter of them all. And because I'm one of the vice chairs of the committee, basically the work of the Appropriations Committee gets done by 13 different subcommittees that cover different subject matters. And so the other vice chair and I split up all the subcommittees, and between the 2 of us, we sit on all of them so that we can make sure that all the information gets to the right place and handle some of the logistics for that. And so that is a huge range of subjects. So that requires for me, a lot of relationship building, a steep learning curve to learn things about the higher education system and how the economics of that works, human services, you name it. There's a huge amount of information, and it's really important to be able to identify early on those people, both other legislators, other people in the government, and other people in the community, advocates who have a deep knowledge of that subject matter, and to try to hear them as much as possible. And that often means having, people who have lobbyists will reach out to me and make appointments to come see me, and people who don't. And so I have tried to make a point of, when one particular industry comes to see me, to make sure that I seek out an opportunity to hear the other side. I am, partly this is my own background as a litigator, but I believe strongly that if you can't articulate the strongest argument on the other side, then you're really not prepared to make a decision. You have to really understand it. And every single important issue that we consider as a legislator has legitimate arguments on both sides, and we have to weigh the costs and benefits of both sides of it and try to come to a decision. So it's a wide variety of things. So to tick through some of the ones that I was most closely involved with, we passed 3 gun safety bills this term, which is unusual. In the past, there's maybe been 1 anti-gun violence bill a term. The culture has shifted, and you see now in Hartford, where you used to see some lobbyists, now you see in the hallways and in the gallery, you see a lot of activists who are bringing a lot of data to the argument about curbing gun violence. And so we passed 3 bills this year. One was Eason's Law, which requires safe storage of both loaded and unloaded weapons in the home. We had previous legislation that required loaded weapons to be stored, but we had a really tragic, it's named for Ethan Song because of a tragic incident involving a weapon that was, a firearm that was stored next to its ammunition, and so it was very simple for these two kids to put it together and he died. So that bill passed with wide bipartisan support, in part because of those activists who are in there having those conversations, and in part because we, in the Judiciary Committee in particular, have a really robust dialogue between Republicans and Democrats on the committee. And it was actually all three of the bills got really good bipartisan support. The other one was a ban on ghost guns, which made it partway through the legislature last term. And the third one was safe storage of a firearm in an unattended motor vehicle. And that one, I actually found that was an interesting. The third one was the hardest one to get passed for a lot of actually understandable reasons. And one of the concerns that was raised for the initial bill was the initial bill required you to store a weapon in an unattended car in a gun box, a locked gun box. And if you don't have a trunk in your car or somewhere to hide that, sometimes that means you have a gun safe sitting on your back seat. And it can be like a glaring light saying, I have a gun in the car, come take my gun in the car. So we actually worked to pass amendments to that bill which allowed people to also store weapons in a locked glove box or a locked toolbox. So that it doesn't, you have some, people have some options also. And I think that at the end of the day was a good bill, and that also got some bipartisan support. So that was those are three important pieces of legislation. We passed Judiciary also, a bill that I was very interested in, which is a little bit quirky, but it has to do with the transparency of criminal prosecutions. In Connecticut, as in a lot of other states, there hasn't been, it's very hard to see, let me back up a little bit. There's a lot in the news recently about sort of those initial prosecutorial decisions and how much those decisions get made out of public view that have real implications for who and what gets prosecuted in our state. And because we have a lot of criminal laws, and we do not have 100% enforcement of criminal, either state or federal laws, it's not possible. So people are making judgments all of the time, and in any way that we can make that process more transparent so people can understand the choices that are being made by some by elected officials and some not by elected officials, the better off we are. So that was a really important bill. We also passed a number of environmental bills. Plastic bag ban has been something that I've been talking a lot about, in part because I had a group of 8th graders from Kellogg School in Falls Village working on that bill and advocating for it and coming to testify. They were the first people to testify on that bill. And that's another longer story about how, so that we had about a dozen legislators, including me, put forward proposed bills to ban the single-use plastic bag. And they were put together and turned into a committee bill that passed the Environment Committee with strong support. It then, to illustrate the process a little bit, this is one of the bills that got put into the budget. So the budget, when it gets passed, has the first few pages of the budget are the numbers, the dollars that are appropriated to various policies and programs. The next 400-odd pages is what's called the implementer. And it's all the statutory language that backs up those numbers. But it also sometimes contains substantive legislation. So it comes with short notice because it gets negotiated right up to the end. And the plastic bag ban was in there, but it was very different. Much weaker. Included a tax on plastic bags for the first few years, which was not what we had passed in the Environment Committee, and then kicked in a ban after a couple of years, but the ban had a lot of exceptions. We who were paying attention to that found that in the budget, noticed that it wasn't what we wanted, and the whole grassroots environmental community sprang up, went into action in that building, and we got that changed before the budget got passed. So we now have a ban in place. The ban will kick in 2021, and until then there will be a 10-cent fee on single-use plastic bags. And I think that gives times for businesses to adjust, and also for people to, one of the, I think, consequences of that is that we have to have efforts to get reusable bags in the hands of people for whom, it's an economic, it's a real economic issue. So we work with nonprofits and the state in order to make sure we get that. And that was one of the things the kids did. The kids came in not just to testify, but they came in with bags made from feed bags, I think. So they were incredibly impressive and focused on real solutions. We passed a bill, for those of you who have been paying attention to Cricket Valley, which is the power plant in New York State, just over the border, that is now, I think, accelerated. It's scheduled to come online, and we're not really sure when it could, but it could be late summer. So we passed a bill that allows the towns who might be, so Cricket Valley made a lot of promises about how they're not going to increase air pollution and environmental consequences for it, but we're in the, okay, but let's make sure. So what's really important right now is for all the towns who are in the sort of airshed of Cricket Valley to do baseline monitoring of their air quality today, so that they can demonstrate if there are, in fact, consequences from this plant on their line, that we can mobilize quickly and take action. And so a lot of towns, as you may know, are starting to set up monitoring equipment. What our bill does is give those towns support from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to ensure that their data is the right kind of data, and that the data from the different towns can be added up, and that it's comparable, and we can make use of it with speed if we need to. Another thing that we fought for during it was, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Community Investment Act, but the Community Investment Act, which is historic legislation, basically it's a funding mechanism for open space, environmental issues, agriculture, particularly dairy, affordable housing, and historic preservation. Those are really important funds for the Northwest corner, and they're huge in preserving many things that are important to us. The governor's proposal initially, although the funding was kept to our things that are covered by that, it was swept into the general fund, and we said no. And so that is kept. I'm very pleased that I was able to keep, with other legislators, keep that in a separate, transparent fund, so it's clear that those funds are spent on the things for which they were intended. So healthcare is another area, huge, complicated area that is probably topic number one when I was campaigning. So that's, as you know, a broad, complicated area. A few of the bills that we did pass this year, one is in mental health parity. The bill we passed this year essentially is a sort of second step in making sure that insurance companies, which are already legally committed to provide mental health care in parity with physical health care, that we are making them accountable. They have to report to us from time to time so that we can see that that's actually happening on the ground. Because that is definitely one of the, it's one thing, there's many stories. One thing, we pass a piece of legislation and then we're done and we, wipe our hands and move on to the next topic. It's all about the follow-up. It's all about how these things actually get enforced in the community. Another example of that on the health end is that we did pass legislation to raise the age for tobacco and vaping products from 18 to 21. We know a lot about science of addiction, and the later you can postpone young people from using those kinds of products, the better off we are of them not being addicted. And there's strong evidence to suggest that anyone who doesn't smoke or use vape until they're 21 probably doesn't do it at all. So that's huge, but there's also pretty strong evidence to suggest that maybe no one has ever carded anybody when it was 18. So, okay, if people aren't actually taking IDs, what's the point of this legislation? So, again, the legislation is great, we've laid down a principle, but what's going to happen next in terms of enforcement? The other sort of big thing, big complicated thing, of course, is the budget. Household budgets are compromises. State's budget, the legislature can't wade in at, nearly 500 pages, maybe more than 500 pages. Complicated, filled with compromises, but the main principle that we were trying to do is get it. Probably the first budget we've done on time in some time. So one of the mantras that I definitely heard from our towns who were trying to plan for their future is we just need to know. You need to tell us so that we can make our plans going forward, what kind of funding we can rely on, what are we going to get from you, what's not going to happen. And so I think there are several things in the budget that go after that, predictability and stability. And so part of it is just passing a balanced budget on time, which is a huge achievement. Within that, there was a huge, obviously, the major problem Connecticut faces in terms of its fiscal health are unfunded pension liabilities. We've kicked the can down the road for many years, and I have heard sort of more seasoned legislatures on both sides of the political spectrum explain to me how that happened, and it's a very complicated thing. It's, everybody's got a story of how we got here. But we are here, and we're at a point where we can no longer continue to do that. So on the teachers' pension fund, the payments that were due to that fund were escalating at an unsustainable rate, and would quickly freeze out the state budget if we didn't find a way to even them out over time. We couldn't just say, okay, we're going to even them out over time, because we have sensibly put in place a lot of fiscal restraints and bond covenants, for example, that say you can't change the terms. You agreed to this, set of terms that you were going to make these payments. You can't just change your mind and change the set of terms. So within those caveats, what we did is this is very complicated, and I'm going to try to make it a little simple, but essentially what we did is we took about $380 million from the state's surplus this year and put it aside, separate from the rainy day fund, which is also protects us from future downturns. Which is that's equal to the maximum payment that we would have to make on behalf of those systems on any particular year. And by setting that aside and making adequate provision to ensure that the stability of this fund and making sure that there's nothing that would get in the way of us making appropriate payments to teachers, that enabled us to then restructure the payments over time. And yes, it does mean we've extended our obligations up for a longer period of time, but it means that they are predictable and even, so that we can budget in a sensible way. Full of compromises, right? There's no easy answer hiding under the rock somewhere. We've got to make choices. But I think that's very much in line with an effort to bring the state's finances into sustainability and predictability, while also paying what we need to pay, not just finding a way to get the payment through. So that was very complicated, but we were glad to get it done. Then I just, on the compromises, I think I touched on some of them, but there's constant, particularly on these big ticket items, there's constant negotiation going on, and sometimes it's between Democrats and Republicans, like in the gun safety bills and some of the, particularly the judiciary bills, that was where a lot of that negotiation happened. In other bills that tend to be negotiated within the Democratic caucus, because the Republican caucus has decided they're not going to support them, or that very few of them will support them, and that's for a variety of reasons. So some of those, like minimum wage, paid family medical leave, those get negotiated within the Democratic caucus, and what that means is, for example, on minimum wage, I and a few other legislators were pushing to extend the period of time over which we did pass minimum wage legislation to back up, and we'll move towards a $15 an hour minimum wage. The original proposal had us doing that in 3 years. We had that extended out to 4.5 years. We also exempted tipped workers, or people there's a separate scale for people who work in the restaurant industry, in particular, tipped workers in general. And partly that's, we heard from the restaurant business about how particularly difficult it was for them, but also an understanding that tipped workers, on average, their wages do keep up better with inflation than people who aren't tipped. And so some of the advocates for minimum wage were crushed by the fact that we exempted them. Obviously others who are involved in the restaurant industry had a different reaction. So lots of compromises on that bill within the Democratic caucus. Another bill that I think had a lot of comment, was a great bill, but definitely a compromise, was a bill that that we did pass that will ensure that police and firefighters are covered for PTSD by workers' compensation. That has been a huge issue that we've been working. It grew out of Sandy Hook, and it's been a huge issue that other legislators have been working on for more than a decade, for sure. And the compromise was, of course, with that the third category that's not in there are EMTs, and they should be in there. But it was a compromise bill because towns in particular, this is a substantial increase in cost for them, and so we got to a point where we had the support of the collections of small town organizations like ours. Had got the compromise for covering police and fire, but they couldn't cover EMTs. So, that's hard because, if this comes out of Sandy Hook, there's somebody that the EMTs faced a bigger burden of PST probably than anyone else. And so that was a really tough bill. I happened to sit in chamber next to the chair of the Public Safety Committee, and it was really hard for him, but he has, at least this increases the level of coverage for more people, and we laid a marker down to find a way to get EMTs included in the future. So, it achieved great things, but not everything we wanted to, because we've got to make compromises, and that's where that compromise got struck.
Maria, how does that affect in towns like ours the volunteer? Are they considered different?
No, volunteer firefighters will be covered.
And volunteer EMTs?
EMTs are not. I mean, it doesn't. The legislation doesn't make a distinction between. I mean, that's particularly evident for firefighters, because they are, in our community, they are volunteer, and in some communities they might be. Torrington has part volunteer and part paid. They are all covered by this, but EMTs, whether paid or unpaid, are not covered. And one of the challenges, actually, to having EMTs be covered in here is that they are handled in such widely disparate ways throughout the state. So there wasn't one, lobbying group. The firefighters, the most vocal lobbying group, of course, is the professional firefighters. But usually, particularly on this issue, they can bring volunteers along with them and advocate for them as well, which they did in this case. Because EMT services are handled by a variety of different ways, it's not as, they don't have a single voice to speak for them anyway. And I think that definitely, I heard from a lot of EMTs about that, about how to fix that problem, how to get somebody in the room that can speak for them generally on this particular issue, so that they get, because that matters. Having a voice in the room who can really push back and argue for that particular position, that makes a difference. If you're not in the room, things are going to get done without you. They're going to be left out. So I think there were definitely people paying attention to the fact that EMTs were not included in this, and lots of people interested in moving forward. But understand that it's costly for towns, so we need to figure out how to work too, without just pushing another mandate onto the towns. So a few things that didn't make it over the line this year that I really want to focus on. One is municipal gain, and that's a jargon word that's going to be important to talk about. But basically, it's about rural connectivity, and municipal gain was one way to get there. And municipal gain, to just basically on your telephone poles are controlled jointly by utilities. But there is a physical space reserved on them for the use of municipalities. And there have been efforts by towns to try to use that space to create municipal broadband. Our lack of or poor quality internet service is a huge problem for us around here. I hear countless stories about it. I just got a call from a family the other day who moved here because they want to raise their daughter in this area. And they are both freelancers, and they didn't realize when they moved in the house, they just assumed that they had connectivity, and they don't. Or they have very poor connectivity, which is what we have in the house, which is almost unusable at any time that a working parent or a school-age child would be home. So, and we're trying to bring this kind of family here. This is exactly who we want to have, have here. People who can run, small businesses out of their homes and communicate with New York and Boston that are reasonably in close proximity to us, who have who want to be out in this sort of green space. And if we can't get and keep them here, that's a huge problem. So we'd like that space on the telephone pole to be able to be used for town to create municipal broadband service. The regulatory authority, 2 years ago now, I guess, had a ruling which said, well, even though the statute says for any purpose, a municipality may use it for any purpose, they said, well, that doesn't include municipal broadband. So we're trying to get that changed. As you can imagine, you can sort of predict what the sides are. The incumbent providers, the frontiers, don't want competition on their poles. And that, some of that is selfish, but some of that, honestly, we understand, because some of their fears are about a town taking their free access to that pole and selling it to another third-party provider who then gets to compete at an unfair advantage. And that's not, I get, that's not fair to them who have made the investment in those poles. So we need to have, these are complicated conversations. We had a bill, just using the word municipal gain, I can't believe how often I say that. The first time I heard somebody say, what the heck is a municipal gain? And it's got, one touch make ready. And I mean, there's so much jargon in this field that it takes, that you sort of see people, even people on the energy and technology committee's eyes start to really good. So it does take a lot of education to understand that for us it's about rural connectivity, but there are plenty of other advocates in other parts of the state that are in more urban areas where there's urban deserts of kids who just don't have adequate access to the internet. So we have now connected a pretty wide variety of legislators who are interested in continuing to push for this, and we've made it clear that, so we got it through the Energy and Technology Committee, we got it through the Finance Committee, but because through the vagaries of the committee process, it was labeled a Senate bill, it needed a vote in the Senate first, and it didn't get that. That is the sort of final, the conversations in committees are often very substantive, and they pit the sort of two sides against one another and make those balances. Often at the end of the day, whether or not a bill gets called for a vote or not, is not about the substance of the bill. It's about the competition between the House and the Senate, or it's about whether just there's somebody in the room who's saying this is important and you need to raise it. So I have reached out to the Senate chair of the Energy and Technology Committee, who knows that I'm still in this and that we're flexible and that we just need to find a way to increase rural connectivity because the incumbent providers are not doing it adequately and not doing it at all in some cases. So that's a big one that I'm going to continue to work on. And I will say also on the networking thing, I now have talked about this enough that everywhere I go and do a presentation like this, even if I don't talk about it, people come up to me and talk and say, oh, I know, I just talked to, I had dinner with two people who live in the area who are connected to that field and they really want to help. So, I'm building up a pile of business cards of people who really, I think, can creatively work on different solutions for this for all of us. So, I'm optimistic that it's going to take work. Early voting. We took a baby step. Many of us had hoped we'd be taking a big step and you'd have early voting on a referendum on the next ballot in 2020. So because voting, and the way we vote in Connecticut is part of our state constitution, we can't change it by legislation. It has to be done by constitutional amendment. So that means in order to get something, in order to create a referendum on a constitutional amendment, you have to either pass it by supermajorities in both the House and the Senate, or pass it by regular majorities with two different legislatures, or 2 years apart. We, in the House, our initial bill was for a referendum on both early voting and no excuse absentee ballots. I talked to a lot of, one of the interesting things about my district is I have 9 towns, which means I have 9 registrars and 9 town clerks, and so I talked to a lot of them about how this works for them and how they would like to handle it. And I heard a lot of them really would like to see no excuse absentee ballots. We in the House made a compromise because the Republican caucus was willing to support some of them, not all of them, but enough of them were willing to support early voting, but they were not willing to support no excuse absentee voting. So we had a choice to face, which was go ahead with no Republican support and have a majority, but only a bare majority, or go for a supermajority and agree to drop for this year no excuse absentee ballot. We went for the latter because we really wanted it on the ballot quickly. So in the House, we did get a supermajority because we made that agreement. The Senate did not. So it passed by majority. So we've taken that first baby step, but we will have to vote on it again in 2 years in order to see that on the ballot. So that was a disappointment, but at least we made the baby step. Another, on a smaller matter, but I think for us in this area, an important matter is bears. I hear a lot about bears, and particularly right now I'm hearing a lot about bears. And I will say that, I mean, so we had 2 bills in the Environment Committee about bears. So I had a lot of conversations about that during the term. And one was a non-lethal bear requiring the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to formulate and implement a systematic plan for non-lethal bear management. And some of you may remember that we trapped, there's Curtis on cue. We trapped a bear in Salisbury last summer who'd been making the rounds downtown. And that was a perfect example of non-lethal management. She was trapped, anesthetized. Then the biologist came in, and Chris can correct me on the details of this, but essentially she was then, once she woke up, she was tagged. When she woke up, she was kept in Salisbury, but taken to the woods, and then, I don't know what the term is, but she was like tased or hazed. She was subjected to painful but not harmful treatment to teach her that association with humans is a bad and dangerous thing, and you should stay out of town. And it turned out, she had cubs in the woods, and so hopefully she will teach that behavior to the cubs. There is evidence in other states of those kinds of plans working to reduce bear-human interaction. So we have it's my impression that we don't do it on a systematic basis. So this bill would have taken us to a place where there was, people could reliably, we would put in place certain measures that we have control of, and then you would be able to rely on DEEP to take over, manage issues that would train the bears in a way to stay out of town. That bill, to my disappointment, passed environment with, I think, unanimous support. Passed the Senate. It was not raised for a vote in the House, so that was a disappointment. The other bill, of course, relates to bear hunting. That started out as a straight-up bear hunting season, and there are other states around us that do that for limited periods of time. It is a very emotional issue, I will tell you. There are people who are implacably committed to one side or the other on that issue. Very hard to bring people together, and some of them who have a reputation for not being great environmental stewards, some legislators, the moment they support anything like this, the other side goes crazy because that's that. So because I hear from a lot of people around here, this is a real issue, and we have enough escalating, bear-human contact that we do have to do something systematic about this. And so I hope we can continue to at least push for getting this non-lethal, bear bill passed, and then just have a conversation so that we understand and have better data about what's actually happening, what works in other states, what doesn't. To move that forward. So, and as I've said recently, please, if you have bear interaction stories, please pass them along to me, because I've heard from people who are honestly at this time of year afraid to leave their house, and that's not good. So we have to be serious about how we deal with it in a way that we can all live it. So just like there's some unresolved business that's in the air. Tolls. Anybody heard about tolls? Marijuana. Anybody heard about these are big ticket issues that just nobody had the appetite to push over the edge because it's very hard. So those are issues that I'd like to hear from you on if you have particular thoughts on those. We hear there's. Our regular session is concluded, but we will have at least one, for sure we'll have one special session this summer on the bonding issues and school construction budget. That's pretty routine. Then we may or may not have a special session on tolls. We won't call that, the governor would likely call that. So Questions? Yeah.
Yeah, since you brought up the topic, I was going to ask a question about it later, but since you brought up the topic about tolls, well, what I'd like to know is what's your position? How do you feel about this issue? And furthermore, how are you going to vote in Governor Lamont's special session?
Well, AP hasn't called a special session yet, so it's still not clear that there's going to be one. And I imagine that's because they're still sort of trying to figure out what it looks like and whether there's support to get it passed. He's not going to call it unless he has the votes to pass it, I would guess. I'm not able to say. So what I've always said is that I'm open to tolls because the question is not tolls, no tolls. The question is there is a huge, like across the board, bipartisan support for the fact that we need a major investment in our infrastructure. It is, in many cases, actively unsafe. In others, it's just costing businesses time of repairs to vehicles, congestion. I mean, we in Connecticut rank, I think, 46 in the country in terms of our infrastructure. So there is, both parties agree that we need to find a way to make a major investment in our roads. The question is, how do you do it? So the two competing proposals, essentially, are tolls and borrowing the money. So to me, if I have to choose between those two, tolls is a more responsible plan because it shares the cost with neighboring, out-of-state drivers who do not pay the gas tax, who drive straight through the state. We are in line with, our neighbors, all of whom have tolls. And it doesn't kick the can down the road and make our kids pay for things that we have to do today. So it all depends on the last, sort of 2-page summary that I saw on the current proposal polls, and it changes all the time. Had discounts for businesses who, have to pay tolls with frequency, or commuters who pay the frequency. It had discounts for in-state drivers get a discount, and it had discounts for sort of subsidies in a way for low-income people in the state. So it addresses some of the concerns. Now you may hear in the news there's a conversation about whether you get a tax deduction for tolls. Some states, I believe Massachusetts does that, but in order to make that work, of course, when you provide a tax subsidy, that's a benefit, but it is also reduces the amount of money that the state can then invest in infrastructure. So what Massachusetts they did is they raised the tolls quite a bit to make up to pay for the tax deduction. So these are all trade-offs, and every time I want to hear from everybody because I understand they're going to affect people very differently. There have been a number of studies about how much it would actually cost people. So, I'm listening.
Well, 10,000 people signed a petition that they don't want tolls. People, I believe it's 60% of the people have voiced opposition that they don't want tolls. Aren't these people going to be listened to?
Of course, but do those people want to borrow the money? Do you want to add the state's debt? Because then you can't. There are lots of other things we don't fund in town. So it's all. A lot of this is how you ask the question. If the question is tolls, no tolls, that's easy. I don't want to pay tolls either.
The Republicans have they have a proposal. It does not consist of tolls. It's just through bonding.
Yeah.
So there is another proposal on the table. People are they're distrustful of the legislators because they have taken money out of that transportation fund over and over and over again.
Be clear about it. I understand the distrust of work because there are lots of reasons for that, so I'm not pushing back against that point. But actually, the funds that are dedicated to the transportation fund have not been rated. The fund was rated once in 2003. It hasn't happened since. What's happened is because the funds that go into the special transportation fund that are dedicated to it are not enough, even really to cover basic maintenance. We have taken additional monies and put them in from time to time. We don't always. And so when we do that one year and we don't do it the next, that's, you're taking money away from the special transportation fund. So these are, has it not been a sustained commitment to it? Absolutely right.
Well, that's not what I've read. What I've read in newspapers is that fund is supposed to be the what an SPF fund, it's supposed to be dedicated for infrastructure alone. And that fund has been raided over and over and over again, and money has been put into other funds chronically. So this is the information that I've been reading. I don't know what information that you're quoting.
Well, we looked at the numbers, and it's you know, again, some of this is semantics and it's history. So the funds that were dedicated to the fund have not been removed from them. It's the additional funds that were put into it to try to cover its costs that have not consistently been put into it. But that said, we are where we are. And so even the Republicans aren't suggesting that that fund is enough to take care of anything much beyond potholes. I mean, by 2024, even with those funds in it, that fund is bankrupt.
Well, my point is that people are distrustful of the way that has been handled through the years. And that's another reason why people do not want tolls. They don't trust the way that funding would be handled.
Yeah.
But that's not the main reason. The main reason is people just do not want a new tax.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Maybe I'm ignorant of this, but what highways are they talking about total? Is it 95, I assume, they used to be
Yes.
toll, and 91?
91, 95, 84, part of the Merit,
Yeah.
and what's the one? So it is. So here's, I get distrust of government. I really do, and not just this question, but others as well. Here's some reasons why I think this is different. First of all, we have to get federal approval to do this. Because if we don't get federal approval to do this, we lose our federal funds, because they're significant. So we've been in conversation with the federal government all along to make sure that the plans we're putting forward are within the range they statutory. One of the requirements is that money from tolls goes to the toll roads. Can't spend on anything else. And if we spend it on something else, there goes our federal funds. So we are being held to someone else's standard, which I think helps. And it does, you know, those roads are not in the northwest corner. But they do affect some people who do, we're a small state, people do business across the state, so I understand some people, you know, they're going to be regularly paying. But it also means that if you have a dedicated revenue stream to fix these repairs that we know we have to make, that makes it more possible for other transportation funds to be spent up here. So, you know, that's part of the advocacy for it.
Have they made an estimate of how much, if they did toll those roads, how much they would get from that? Would that be enough to cover the maintenance on those roads?
Yes, it is. It takes a while to kick in because first of all, there's some build the tolls, and then so it doesn't. I think even if they were to pass today, it would take about a year and a half for them to fully kick in. When it's fully kicked in, the projection that it will raise about $8 million in revenue, which is adequate to fund some of the big ticket projects.
Maria, just to follow up on what you said, when the people have been talking about tolls, no tolls for a long time, and someone told me that if you have tolls, you lose all your federal, all the federal help, and so it's always been should we keep the federal or should we not? From what you just said, it looks like you won't lose it but maybe it's reduced. Could you address
Correct.
that?
No, it's not reduced. But it is very important that we have to do it according to federal laws, which is why a number of proposals, like the feds have been not very unfortunately made a promise during the campaign that was just for trucks. We can talk about that later. But feds wouldn't let us do that. We can't have border-only tolls. The federal government wouldn't let us do that. It's also unconstitutional, but you can ask that. So the federal government will insist that it is congestion pricing, and that it is focused on congested areas, and it will alleviate congestion, which helps businesses and reduces transportation costs for people. So it is very important that we don't lose federal funds, and so we have to get approval. This is another reason why some of the details are never going to be entirely worked out before, because we have to have room to have that conversation with the federal government if they say, well, yes, this, but you have to tweak this. So,
Connecticut just passed a law shielding and giving additional shielding of illegal aliens from federal law enforcement. Now, the 9/11 Commission, which investigated the attacks, which killed 3,000 people, including my son, stated very clearly that we have to know who's coming into the country, and that open borders and illegal immigration violate those precepts. This state gives driver's licenses to illegal aliens. The 9/11 Commission also stated that driver's licenses were the key document that allowed the 9/11 terrorists to live in the country, open bank accounts, plan, finance, and carry out their attacks. Now, I was wondering, would you support a bill that would prohibit the issuance of driver's licenses to illegal aliens in accordance with the findings, the very definite findings of the 9/11 Commission? Or is it that you discount those findings, which was a bipartisan commission of experts? Or you discount that, or to you, the benefits for illegal aliens is of greater importance than the security of American citizens?
Well, sorry.
Well, I have talked to many politicians, and I've heard that. I am sorry about your son, but there's no action. Okay, you keep giving the licenses, which are the key to these terrorist acts, and you keep shielding them with further additional shielding from federal law enforcement. Your law even protects them when they've been through the entire procedure of court, and they've been federal courts, and they've been issued an order of deportation by a court. And you don't seem to care. You are more interested. And are you going to change your position or continue to protect illegal aliens at the expense of the safety of American citizens, like my son?
Well, I didn't. I wasn't in the legislature.
I know you weren't. You support legislation.
And I would have to look into it because I don't make decisions like that.
Well, you could make a decision that the 9/11 Commission was
I'd be very happy to read that. I haven't read the 9/11 Commission report in many years.
So it might be helpful.
Yeah, I would be happy to do that. I will say that we did have a bill that has to do with information sharing between local law enforcement and ICE that did pass through the legislature.
Because your bill actually prevents information from passing from local enforcement and prevents people, law enforcement officials in the state from enforcing immigration law. So you've got everything just about conceivable to shield the illegal aliens. And every one of them we know is nothing of, because they've not been screened. We know nothing about them. As the Commission pointed out, any illegal alien can be a terrorist because we don't know who they are. They haven't been screened by immigration agencies. So you can use cagey language all you want, but there are certain very distinct things that can be done that have been decided by the 9/11 Commission and others that are clear, and further discussion about, well, I have to look into it, and I'm sorry about your son, that doesn't wash anymore. You know, it's been 18 years, and in addition, the driver's licenses that are issued to illegal aliens, I got a copy from the Secretary of State. It looks virtually identical to a license issued to a citizen, which facilitates voting by illegals. Now, if the whole scheme, the plan of the program is to allow illegals to live here and to vote, well, then you've done your job. But if you want to protect American citizens, maybe you ought to change the situation a little bit.
No one's suggesting that they vote.
Well, the driver's license is indistinguishable.
It's not indistinguishable.
Almost. I think there's a slight color change in the color of the state.
It is part of this. Is obviously a really complicated area.
I know it's complicated.
But
I know the safety of American citizens is complicated, but the answer is clear-cut and has been decided by people like the bipartisan commission. It's not open to discussion unless you really care about the benefits for illegal aliens, and they're not undocumented. You can call a bathtub a pussycat, but it's still a bathtub under federal law. And an illegal alien is an illegal alien and not an undocumented immigrant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Just a comment. There was an instance in the media, I think it was just last week, that they had caught, I believe it was 3 ISIS people that on the southern border that were trying to come in to this country, ISIS. So I mean, it's a problem. I mean, and it's something that should be addressed.
Well, that's a federal issue, the border. So it's not something that we deal with a lot in the state. We have dealt with, I mean, I do hear from, I have a law enforcement background, and I hear from a lot of law enforcement that want to be able to make sure that they have an understanding of what's going on in all the pockets of their communities. And to do that, they need to be able to have communications with all the people who live here. And so there's a variety of ways to approach that.
Well, it actually is a problem for people around here, for everybody, because the safety of the people in this area, in this country, needs to be protected. So if a terrorist does come into the country, it affects everybody.
Yeah.
It's a safety issue.
Thank you for being here. Please sign up on I do, so communication-wise, I'd love if anyone has any other input on this. What I've generally done is gotten in the habit of doing videos on Thursdays usually, followed up by, so that's on Facebook, and then followed up by an email newsletter that sometimes has additional links and additional information that I send out the next day. So you can sign up for that kind of stuff here.
Maria, I just want to publicly thank you for the amount of information that you're giving back to your constituents. I find that really useful. The intricacies of the state legislature have always been a mystery to me. You've been a lot to talk about.
Thank you. They were a mystery to me when I first started doing our so that is one of my goals to bring a greater understanding, because I think it makes for a better conversation. You ought to know what you're voting for, and so I'm happy to.
Well, especially, I'm sure a lot of people like myself are concerned about promoting economic activities in our corner of the state. As I understand it, there was a bill passed that would encourage 5% of the money spent on produce to be locally purchased. And I don't see any evidence of that being put out as public information now. You don't go to the store, we don't have local produce sections.
I gotta tell you, I don't know about that provision, so I'm gonna look that up. That sounds like a really interesting idea. Particularly around here. I mean, agriculture. I remember when we first moved to the area, and the beautiful farms all around here. And at first, the farmers markets weren't really started up then, and it was hard to get fresh produce. They were all going to farmers markets somewhere else, in bigger, more urban areas. And so, that's been a real movement over the last at least 15 years to bring some of that, increase, people can sign up for, community shares in local farms. Each town in the area has their own farmers markets, which has local produce in it. So I think we've started to address that problem, but I'd love to look into that.
I think I found it on Wikipedia. It was something part of the agricultural policy in the state, and it was maybe a year or so out of date. But
maybe it's a policy in the Department of Agriculture, but I'll look that up. The new Commissioner of Agriculture is usually head of the Farm Bureau, and he's a big presence around here in this area, knows this area well. So, yeah, thank you. Okay. Have a great day. Go to Farmington.